It's past midnight in Niyoshima, Japan, March 18th, 1984. A residential street. Quiet. The kind of quiet that a country built on order takes for granted. Inside one of the homes, a man is in a bathtub. He's 42 years old. He runs one of the most recognizable candy companies in Asia. In this moment, he is just a man in warm water thinking whatever people think about at the end of a long Tuesday. Then the door opens. Two of them, masked. One carries a pistol, one carries a rifle. They find him exactly as vulnerable as a person can be. They tell him to get up. They march him out of his own house and into the dark. And Japan, as it understood itself, begins to come apart. This is Still Unexplained. Brief explorations of unsolved mysteries. My name is Mark. To understand why what happened next matters so much, you have to understand what Japan believed about itself in 1984. The country had rebuilt from almost total devastation in under 4 decades. The economy was surging. Violent crime was, by almost any international measure, vanishingly rare. There was a kind of social contract in place, unspoken, but deeply felt. The state would maintain order, the corporation would provide stability, the citizen would trust both. It was not a perfect arrangement, but it was a durable one, and it had held. The man in the bathtub was Katsuhisa Izaki, president of Izaki Gloco, the company behind Pocky, among other things. If you've ever eaten Pocky, it's a popular Japanese snack consisting of a crunchy biscuit stick, partially coated in a sweet, creamy frosting. You've eaten a Gloco product. The man was well known, well regarded, and was now being driven through the night to a warehouse in Ibaraka, Osaki. The ransom demanded when it came was not a small one. 1 billion yen, 100 kilograms of gold bullion. Whoever had done this was not thinking small. 3 days later, Izaki escaped. He found a water-controlled cabin near Aigawa Stream and slipped out while his captors were not watching. He made it home. The police assumed the worst was over. It was not. Not even close. Here's the detail that reshapes everything before it. In 1978, 6 years before the kidnapping, a cassette tape arrived at Gloco's managing director. A middle-aged voice, calm, methodical. The tape threatened kidnapping, arson, and the distribution of candy laced with prussic acid. It named Gloco specifically. It was detailed, it was eerie, and it was largely filed away. That tape is now called the Showa 53 tape, and when investigators pulled it out after the 1984 kidnapping, the hair on the back of several necks must have stood up, because whoever made that tape had not just predicted the campaign, they had described it. This was not impulsive, this was rehearsed. After Izaki's escape, the group did not disappear. They announced themselves. They sent letters to news organizations and to the police. They signed those letters, Kaji Ninjo Isi Minso. In English, that translates roughly to monster with 21 faces. The name was not random. It was a direct reference to a fictional villain from the detective novels of Idora Rampo, a celebrated Japanese mystery writer whose pen name was itself derived from Edgar Allan Poe. The monster was signing its crimes with a literary citation, which is either the most arrogant thing a criminal can do or the most self-aware. The letters were written in a sharp Osaka dialect, mocking, precise, dripping with contempt for law enforcement. One of the early ones addressed to police directly. Quote, "Are you stupid? There are so many of you. What on earth are you doing? If you are real pros, try catching me." Unquote. Modern stylometric analysis suggests the dialect was a performance, a calculated choice designed to embarrass investigators who would have to read these letters at press conferences. Then came the food. The monster announced they had laced Gloco candy with potassium cyanide and placed it in stores across Japan. The country did not panic quietly. Gloco stock dropped from 745 yen to 598 yen within months. The company lost the equivalent of $21 million. Nearly 1,000 workers were laid off. The economic damage was specific, surgical, and devastating. But here's the part that still puzzles researchers. The poison products in stores had stickers on them. Warning stickers. They read things like danger, contains toxins, and you will die if you eat this. The monster was poisoning shells while labeling the poison. So nobody died. And whoever this was, they seemed to know exactly what they were doing. The goal was not bodies. It was fear. Economic ruin without the political consequences of a mass casualty event. They had somehow figured out how to weaponize paranoia while leaving themselves an exit from the worst charges. Eventually, after extracting considerable suffering from Gloco, the group declared they would forgive the company. The reason they gave in their letter was, and I'm not making this up, that a 4-year-old child in their group cried every day because he could not eat Gloco products. I've read a lot of criminal correspondence, and that is one in a category by itself. Then they moved on to Morinaga, and then to other companies, House Foods, Marudai Ham. The campaign would last 17 months. Throughout all of it, investigators kept encountering the same man. They did not know his name. They called him the Fox-Eyed Man. He was first spotted during a failed money drop sitting near a train in Kyoto. Well-built, short permed hair, wearing sunglasses that did not quite cover his eyes, that one undercover officer described as narrow, calculating, like those of a fox. He appeared again during a surveillance operation on the Meishin Expressway, spotted at a rest stop, and the detail from that sighting is one that stays with you. He was wearing a wireless receiver with headphones. He was monitoring police radio frequencies in real time while they were trying to catch him. Over the full investigation, more than 1.2 million officers were mobilized. The Fox-Eyed Man was never caught. On November 14, 1984, a sting operation near the Meishin Expressway came the closest. Officers were in position. The plan was in motion. Then, a patrol car from the Shiga Prefecture Police, completely unaware that a major operation was underway, spotted a suspicious station wagon parked with its lights off. The officer did what a good officer would do. He shone his flashlights on the driver, man in a golf cap, wireless receiver, headphones. The Fox-Eyed Man floored it. The patrol car gave chase. He vanished in the dark. Coordination between the Osaka, Kyoto, and Shiga divisions had broken down. The divisions had not been talking to each other. The moment dissolved. The weight of that night was carried longest by Shoji Yamamoto, the superintendent of the Shiga Prefecture Police. Yamamoto was what the Japanese system called a no-career officer, someone who had risen through merit rather than through the elite educational pipeline that produced a brass in Tokyo. He was, by most accounts, a dedicated man who had done things the hard way. But in August 1985, he walked into his garden and he set himself on fire. The monster responded. Their final letter acknowledged his death. It called him stupid for dying. Then, in the same breath, it said he had died like a man. They announced they were done. They wrote, other things to do. And they were never heard from again. So here is where it splits. Because the monster with 21 faces left behind a crime that expired before it could be solved. The statute of limitations on the kidnapping ran out in 1994. The poisoning charges in 2000. No one can ever be charged, which means the theories are all that is left. The first and most clinical explanation is financial. Consider the mechanics. Gloco stock dropped nearly 20% from its January high to its May low in 1984, a window of roughly 25% decline from peak to trough. If someone knew that window was coming, If they had shorted the stock or bought at the floor just before the forgiveness letters caused a rebound, the returns would have been substantial. The campaign had the structure of a market manipulation play dressed up as an extortion theater. The weakness here are significant, though. Short-selling Japanese equities in 1984 was not a simple retail operation, and there was no financial trail that investigators ever surfaced. The theory is elegant, but it's also unprovable without records that either do not exist or have never been released. Now, if you need a more human explanation, here's the one most investigators quietly return to. The monster knew too much. They knew specific typewriter models used inside Gloco's factories. They knew which side entrances were least monitored. The Showa 53 tape, made 6 years before the campaign, suggested a long-simmering, specific grievance against Gloco in particular. This points to someone with direct access. A former employee, a contractor, someone whose loyalty had curdled into something methodical and cold. A disgruntled insider does not fully explain the scale of the operation or the sophistication of the counter-surveillance techniques, but it does explain the intimacy of the knowledge. The tension between those two things has never been quite resolved. And then there is the version of the story that almost nobody wants to say out loud because it sounds dramatic and then turns out to be mostly accurate. Professional organized crime. The Yakuza, specifically the Boiroi-Kudan syndicate that operates heavily in the Hanshin corridor at that time. The extortion mechanics were sophisticated. The counter-surveillance was professional grade. The calm, strategic escalation from one target to the next had the feel of an organization that had done this before, or at least had thought it out very carefully. The sticking point is the letters, the literary references, the taunting dialect, the theatrical flair. Most investigators who have spent serious time on this case argue that traditional Yakuza operations do not come with footnotes and literary citations. The monster was too flamboyant, too invested in being perceived for a syndicate whose business model generally depends on invisibility. Which brings us to the theory that keeps surfacing in academic work on the case, the one that sits between all the others and refuses to collapse into any of them. What if the monster was not one thing? What if it was a hybrid? A small group that, with inside knowledge, ideological motivation, and professional criminal connections, organized around a single obsessive intelligence. The Showa 53 tape suggests a mind that had been building this plan for years. The literary references suggest education. The counter-surveillance suggests training. And the warning stickers suggest a moral logic, however warped. These are not the fingerprints of a committee. They feel like one person's worldview, executed by a small and trusted circle. What evidence would settle it? Well, probably only a confession. The fox-eyed man, whoever he was, is likely still alive somewhere in Japan. He'd be in his 60s or 70s now. The law cannot touch him. Whether his conscience can is a different question, and one the case cannot answer. The man in a bathtub. 2 men with guns. A warehouse in Osaka. A cassette tape recorded 6 years earlier. A candy company brought to its knees. A superintendent who died in his garden. And a final letter from a group that simply decided to move on. That image of the fox-eyed man at the rest stop, headphones on, listening to the frequency of the people trying to find him, has stayed with me since I first read about this case. There's something almost unbearably precise about it. Not just that he was monitoring them, but that he knew to, that he had thought of that first. The monster with 21 faces did not just escape justice. They seemed to have understood exactly how justice worked, and planned around it at every turn. The statute of limitations was not an oversight they got lucky on. In a country where legal clocks run on fixed tracks, waiting long enough was always part of the calculation. Japan's courts closed the file. The culture absorbed the case, turning it into novels, manga, and the Laughing Man arc in The Ghost in the Shell, a foundational anime series from 2002, a tribute to a crime so strange it could only be processed through fiction. Some mysteries do not get solved. They just get older. Thank you for spending time with me. If you want to keep exploring, follow Still Unexplained wherever you listen to podcasts, and if the show has earned it, please leave a rating or review. It generally helps people find it. I'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks again.